adventure, friendship, and family come together in the new National Geographic Kids memoir, Running with Wolves, Our Story of Life with the Sawtooth-Pack. It is really following the filmmakers, Emmy Award-winning filmmakers Jim and Jamie Dutcher, and they take you through their life spent living with the Sawtooth-Pack out in Idaho.
Amazing.
Absolutely amazing. Jim and Jamie are really amazing. They're on a mission to really show the world that wolves are amazing animals. They are complex. They are social. They are so important. I can't wait. I want to talk to them about really the importance of what they do for the web of life.
Absolutely.
They are an apex species, and anyway, they can tell you more about it. And I encourage you to go to their website, livingwithwolves.org. But Jim, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. And I'm here too, Jamie.
Hi, Jamie. You're there too. Hey, Nancy and I are both here. We're so excited to have you on the show. Nancy and I have watched your documentaries and read read your books, and it's just so exciting because I know that what I love is that you're now really getting this younger audience involved through National Geographic and this memoir. But let's start at the beginning. Jim the wolf, this is an experience that you were really lucky to have at some point, out on a horse and seeing a wolf for the first time, and it happened more than once, right? And for you to think about covering wolves.
Yes, I did find a wolf in Wyoming. I was a wrangler there when I was 16, and I was out looking for strays, and a wolf and the two of us stared at each other across a field for quite some time, then exchanged places, and then the wolf got bored with me and went away, and I didn't see one again for 30 years. But
wow.
This is what we do. Is we're involved with wolves. We raised a pack of wolves that we raised from puppies. To get into a wolf pack, you need trust. And to go out into the wild and try to film wolves and gain that trust, you really take away what they need to survive, and that's a fear of humans, because wolves are hunted here in these 3 western states.
And this is important, I think. Nancy, I don't know if you guys know this, but she worked with Joy Adamson in Kenya, and I know that you've got family.
Oh.
I think that,
yeah.
And, way back when, back in the 70s and mid-70s, and I was raised out there in the boonies and with different tribes while she was working with Joy until Joy got murdered, unfortunately. And it was really interesting because Nancy, and I want to touch on this because I think it's so important about what you do. And Nancy, you always fought with this thing about being out with the animals, that there was like a science versus telling the story, right?
Well, there was the thing of making an animal a pet when it's supposed to be wild, but you had to get close enough to be able to study. And then you had the Maasai tribe around the lions, who their deal was to kill lions so that they could get married and make a hat out of lion fur. And Joy was trying to convince them that they didn't need to do that, but it's an ancient tradition. So there was a lot of cultural things happening. But for me, as a young person, I was just like, dude, this is so much fun. I'm with lions.
Yeah.
You know? And being able to get, well, there was that part of it, and I had to grow out of that. Like I have to pet the lion, because lions would come into camp and Joy could pet him, but I wasn't allowed to. And I thought that was not fair. So there's a lot of things going on. But
I think that wouldn't be fair either.
Yeah, I was like, that's not fair. But then she said, no.
Yeah, well, it's interesting.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
but
go ahead.
It's interesting that that if we had done this study 100% in the wild, the wolves would have been habituated to our cameras, and of course, as Jim said, the next time somebody would point something at it, it might not be a camera, it could be a gun, and it would endanger the wolves. And in order, our documentary filmmaking with the pack was to get into the social life of wolves and how they live their day-to-day lives. And all social studies done on wolves have always been done in with captive packs in very small enclosures of 1 to 3 acres. And we had the largest enclosure in the world, 25 acres, which really allowed the wolves to open up their lives to us. And what was very rewarding for us is that right before wolf reintroduction was happening, we had a lot of biologists come to the camp and see our wolves because they had never seen wolves in person at all. And after wolves were reintroduced to central Idaho and Yellowstone National Park over the years and studying them, the biologists would come back to us and we would compare notes, and they were seeing things that we were seeing, and we were able to explain things to them that they were seeing but they didn't understand. For instance, in the winter, the pack only uses the den to give birth to pups. They don't sleep underground at all. They curl up in the snow, and they would create what we called sleep sinks, and they were these depressions in the snow that the wolves would sleep in, and they would pile up bits of stick and branches and little bits of fur from the animals they had consumed, and sort of made little mattresses out of them. And so the biologists would come across these in Yellowstone, and they weren't quite sure what they were, but we could then explain to them what it was all about.
Wow.
Because we'd seen them made. Yeah.
See, this is amazing because I know when I started reading the book, and I didn't really realize about the enclosure part. There's that first instinct, well then, you're not really out in the wild doing it, but you are 100%. And Jim, you started this with the beavers. And that to me was really fascinating. And we're watching right now in Yuma, Arizona with the Colorado River restoration, the lower Colorado River. We've watched the beaver come back with them restoring the habitat from what has happened through agriculture and just the whole damming of the Colorado River. And what you were doing there is really fascinating because you are able to really kind of watch and show something that none of us have that opportunity to do or see until you put it out there for us. But I don't think anybody's going to have that opportunity to actually see what's happening inside a beaver dam, right?
Right. To film beavers giving birth was our goal, and this was another National Geographic special, and we recreated some dens in a cabin next to where we live, and the dens had tunnels to swimming areas outside, and the dens had windows that we could open and look at the beavers as they gave birth and film them in a den type situation. Now, now we have these very tiny cameras that you could sneak into a den, but we didn't back then. And so if I tried to swim up a tunnel into a den with my underwater movie camera, I would have terrified the beavers. They would not just not give birth, they would probably desert the pond that they were living in. So the opportunity presented itself to recreate what was in the wild so we could get into their lives. And the same thing with wolves. Wolves are so intelligent and wary of humans. If they sense that we're around, they stop what they're doing. They stop their natural behavior. They watch us and then run away. Well, that wasn't going to work for a film, so we did this in captivity. But the captivity was so huge, 25 acres. Right next to wilderness, a 10,000-foot mountain in the backdrop, right up against camp, and we were able to observe the social behavior of wolves because we gained their trust.
Yeah, and we also, we include that in our filmmaking as well, how the film is made, because we don't, a lot of times if you watch a wildlife documentary, not all of them, but a lot of them, when you see certain animals very close up, usually it's in some kind of a controlled situation. And we felt that it's important to let the audience know why and how you had to do this, because then I think it gives people a better respect for the animal, and a better understanding for how you're trying to bring this intimate observation closer to them, to the audience.
And I think it's important because we're not seeing everything, and you're not always going to see every species. It's going to be rare for all of us to see a wolf in our lifetime. And we're able to see it and understand them. I think they're complex is really a cool word for them, and social for sure. Mm-hmm. We've spent time and done a lot of interviews with the California Wolf Center in Julian, California, where we used to live, and learning about wolves, and understanding the importance of them for the web of life. And that was something I really wanted to talk about with you, because sometimes you see animals and it's like, wow, this is so cool. You watch a documentary and you guys show exactly how you've been building the enclosures and everything. You get this understanding, which is great. But at the same time, you're really showcasing this importance of how it works in the web of life. And I love the web of life, because sometimes I think as humans we don't understand, like, okay, if we eradicate this one bug, how is that going to affect us or the rest of mankind? And a lot of times people don't even get
what has happened in Yellowstone, where you can study the before and after effect of having wolves back, is that years ago, like 80 years ago, wolves were eliminated. About 100 years ago, they were killed off in Yellowstone. And bringing them back, without wolves, we had too many elk in the park, and the park rangers would actually have to hunt the elk at night, and they were just hammering the resources. So having wolves back has made the elk much more wary. They can't hang out in the riparian areas any longer, where they can't see what's sneaking up upon them. So they go up into higher ground and other places where they feel safe from wolves. Meanwhile, back along those riparian areas, along the rivers and streams, this vegetation has come back, and this vegetation cools the water, making the habitat better for trout, and the result is, in Yellowstone, more and bigger fish. Also, just having this vegetation makes habitat for waterfowl, songbirds, beavers, and other animals. Without wolves, there were a huge population of coyotes, and now having wolves back, that's pushed out or killed the coyote population, or almost cut it in half, because most of them just left. And this has been a benefit to birds of prey, because pronghorn antelope. Coyotes specialize in feeding on young antelope fawns, and the wolves don't. They focus on the larger, slow-moving elk.
Yeah, and actually, they've been the biologists in the park started noticing that pronghorn antelope were giving birth to their fawns right near wolf den sites, because they were safe there from coyotes, and the wolves would leave them alone. Which is really cool. And they're also finding that wolves are also helping combat global warming in their small way. As winters are getting warmer in some areas, you have less winter kill, and you have hibernating bears that depend on that food source as they're coming out of hibernation. And then you've got other animals like rodents that feed on these, and foxes feed on these carcasses through the winter. And so there had been less of that. Well, because wolves are back, and we're seeing this in Yellowstone, they'll make a kill, and they won't consume all of the animal all at once, and then other animals will come in and feed, and it's really helped the population that way as well.
It's really interesting how people on the ground who are studying and watching day in and day out for at least a year of a cycle of birth and death in an animal species. What I found with my time with Joy was something that I haven't heard anybody talk about, but we found there was a relationship between elephant and hippo going down to the riverbanks. If the hippo didn't follow, the seeds of certain trees didn't get planted, much like what you were talking about when we're in your book and such about the cottonwoods couldn't grow because the elk ate everything because the wolf was gone. And so
it's all connected.
So I saw that in Africa where the elephant and the hippo would go to the riverbank. Now there was a certain thing that the hippo does a lot of pooping, if I could put it that way, and they have dung heaps up to 4 feet. And within that, the tree seeds would germinate. Now, when the hippo didn't follow the elephant anymore to the riverbank, then there was no vegetation, and then the river would erode, and the rivers would get wider and shallow, and then the fish started dying. So there's this connection.
Yes, everything's
between
connected.
The trophic cascade.
Yeah, and
so the plants are involved.
So everything is involved, and for some reason, humans have a hard time understanding that.
But I think that's what's interesting. I think what's interesting about what you've done in your documentary and in your book is you're showing this relationship with wolves, which wolves have, I mean, I know Little Red Riding Hood and all of those songs and myths and legends, there's all of that, and you do it really well on your website, everyone, livingwithwolves.org. I encourage you to go there. Those myths created fear, and so people's instant reaction to a wolf will be a negative versus this positive. So I think that's important that you're showing being connected with wolves. I know, that's why I brought up Nancy's thing with Joy Adamson because what she was doing, there were a lot of naysayers about it because it's like, oh, you should, don't get connected. But the reality is humans we're animals, right? We part of the
right.
web
We are part of nature as much as we don't like to think it. We are part of the web of life.
Yeah, this is so cool. So, Jamie, this is, here's the memoir, and I love it because it's for young adults and for adults too. You're going to enjoy reading it too. You've got, here's the map of the camp and everything. But this really is a love story too between you and Jim.
Yes,
and
it is.
I love this love story.
Yeah, Jamie and I met coming from Africa.
I know, and I was cracking up. You were talking about your sister's tended camp. Does she still have it? I would just want to know personally.
Yeah.
No, they don't have it anymore, but she still lives in Africa. She lives in Kenya. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but Jamie and I were coming back from Africa on separate trips back in 1987, and we met at Heathrow, and I saw her in the lounge there, and before I got up the nerve to go over and talk to her, they called the flight, and we got aboard the plane, and she passed me, and I said something, and she gave me sort of a smart aleck response. I said, have you been in Africa? Because she was all tan, and she had this warthog and coral necklace around her neck, and so I made a deal with myself. I'll go back and talk to her if she was sitting in the aisle seat and not by the window or in the middle. And she was sitting in the aisle seat, so I went back, and but it then took me another 5 or 6 years until she finally came to Wolf Camp and joined me with
and
filming
writing
the
letters.
wolves.
Does everybody remember
I had to play a little
letter?
hard to get.
Oh my gosh.
She worked at the National Zoo, and she was very helpful to the project.
And that's what was so interesting, where you guys communicated back and forth about what's going on with the wolves, and and all these other critters too. This is happening here, and Jamie, though, number one, anybody who has a warthog, as part of your necklace, I think you rock, because who does that? I would. I love warthogs, and so that is that's a magnet right there. I am an animal lover. I have a warthog on my necklace.
I actually have a stuffed animal, not a real animal, a plush toy. That's a warthog.
Yeah.
I've had it for years. I found it in Florida, and I'm like, oh my gosh,
it's a warthog.
Who does a stuffed toy plush? Say that's a warthog.
I think that happened when Lion King came out, but that helped too, right? So, what was it like going from the world of zoos to being out in the wild?
It was
for you,
it was a
Jamie?
big change. You know, I grew up in the Washington D.C. area, and
Wow.
you know, most of the wild animals are on Capitol Hill. So, although not as many as there are now. And you know, I really
Good one.
it was a very cool experience. Working at the zoo, I was very interested in the animal husbandry, and you know, working up in the hospital when we would get animals in that had to be in for a long time. You know, it was very important to me to try to make their experience in a cage as comfortable as possible, trying to mimic whatever I could do to make them comfortable. So then for me, then going out to the wilds of Idaho and camping in a tented camp for the first time in you know, incredible conditions was interesting and trying, but the best part was, you know, just, you know, being around the wolves and seeing them in this environment and just getting to, you know, observe their day-to-day lives in a really natural setting. It was pretty wonderful. But and I do have to say that Jim did make great effort to make sure that I had all the right clothes.
Oh, okay. That's important because you guys got snow. You went through wildfires too.
Yeah.
Wildfires.
Oh yeah,
Jim,
you know, being the sound recordist, I have to use my fingers a lot. So, you know, I can't wear super thick gloves. So I you know, it was tough trying to move those little dials. I did walk away from the project with a bit of frost nip.
Oh wow!
Jamie coming to wolf camp is one of my favorite chapters of the book, and then bringing her across the Sawtooth Mountains there, and it was just the beginning of winter where we could drive the vehicle a bit closer, but we couldn't use snowmobiles yet, so we had to hike in with our food and everything in our backpacks. And just before I got to where the wolves were, I stopped, and I always did this when I went off to get supplies. I would howl to the pack, and so I howled, and they responded one after another until the whole group was howling back at us.
It was so cool. It was so unreal.
I mean, the howl is. I remember, you know, I was just, you know, living in Julian, and you could hear the wolves out there, you know, and when you go to the California Wolf Center, you can go every Saturday, but you have to go, and you may not see them. You're way away from them because they're trying to keep them as this most natural setting as possible. But you learn so much about these wolves, and they've done extraordinary work. Did you ever work with them with the Sawtooth-Pack?
We haven't worked with them directly, but we do know of them. And I think you know, we work simultaneously, I think, through other projects.
Yeah, they've done amazing stuff, but hearing those howls, I mean, it goes to the core of your being. It's like that is life. There's like a sound.
It does,
just is life. And to be able to be that close and be with them, to me, when they're in their natural setting. I want to touch on this because this is important. I think that when you talk about enclosed areas and they have a lot of land to do it on, you know, acres and acres. And I was thinking back to friends who have acres, and I was like trying to quantify it in my mind. The reality is animals kind of keep to a specific region anyway. Like, don't deer keep within with a 2-mile radius and stay there with like.
A territory.
Yeah,
well,
they
can travel long distance. They especially during breeding season or when the pups are in the den. Then they're stuck in one area. But a wolf can travel 50 miles a day looking for another mate.
Wow.
A wolf pack is made up for your audience of a family of wolves. They're all related. Sometimes other wolves will join the pack, but it's mostly mother, father, aunts and uncles, children, grandchildren, and they hang together as a group and incorporate the cooperation amongst the pack is essential because they have to feed on, especially in the winter, really large ungulates such as deer, elk, and caribou, moose, and for an animal that only weighs about 120 pounds at maximum to 85 with a female wolf, bringing down a 500 to 700 pound elk takes a lot of cooperation, and so the family is essential. They really love their family. Everything's about family.
Yeah, and they have they have varying territories depending on where they're living and what kind of prey they're hunting. In Yellowstone, the territories are smaller because there's so many packs in a smaller area. But in Alaska, you've got much larger territories, and especially during the summer, you won't see wolves together all the time because they'll go off by themselves and they'll hunt things that are easy like rodents and squirrels, and then they'll bring them back to the rest of the pack. And so their area varies, and for instance with our wolves, which we had them in the 25-acre enclosure, that was their world. They never tried to get out. Their family was there, so that was their territory, and they were seemed pretty happy with it.
Yeah, they never paced the fence. And then we put our camp inside the enclosure and live right amongst them, so we could not be, it wouldn't be an event coming in and joining them. And so we would just be able to observe them right there from the yurt and the platform we had, and we would see certain things you just couldn't see with radio telemetry or spotting scopes, how the pack would always settle down in the same areas, and when they woke up, they would always greet the alpha first, and they would go around from one wolf to the other. And there was just so much. One time we saw them out in the field in the summertime, and they looked like they were eating mice or something, and we got our binoculars and realized they were eating flowers. They were eating a type of flower called the shooting star. It's called the shooting star, and so these carnivores were having a little bit of lettuce.
They wanted
a salad.
Maybe. I really do think that carnivores eat. I've seen lions eat plants.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's okay. Maybe they're really hungry, or maybe
it's
a system needs some fiber.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah,
digestion and but what's cool is that you would never see that under any other circumstances. You would never realize that wolves eat shooting stars, and and I ate one and didn't really taste particularly one way or the other. It was rather bland.
I know you could get totally high.
I was going to say, did you get high?
I could have.
I know. You never know.
That's my first thought.
I know. Don't eat the Datura. But I do
because of the name.
No, I do want to talk about
don't
this
eat Datura
because this is so cool that you have this experience and can share it with the world. And when I think about you writing a memoir and putting it so that young adults can read this, and kids and families and everyone. I mean, I'm an adult and I dig it, man. But
cool.
This is important now, isn't it, Jamie? I mean, when you think about it, that education now for youth. I mean, were you inspired to get into the world of animals, Jamie, as a kid?
Oh, very, very early on. I read everything I could about animals. I devoured anything I could, and you're absolutely right. Now more than ever, it is so important. People are losing touch faster and faster with the natural world, and it's really up to these kids to make a difference, and we're really hoping that by having kids read this book and read it with their family, that it can turn the tide. Because if we can't save wolves, then there really isn't hope for many other species. I mean, we are so lucky in North America to have this iconic keystone species that is so intelligent, so compassionate, so smart, and so much like ourselves. And over the decades, people have learned to care and respect for elephants, whales, gorillas, dolphins, that they're sentient beings, and that we do have to care about them. And here we have this animal right here in America, and we have a tremendous chance. And it's important that we take care with this animal and not only work to save wolves, but the natural world as well.
Well, I think it's important what you're saying too. I know Adam Roberts, who comes on our show. I don't know if you've met him through Born Free USA years ago. He's not there anymore, but he's always talked about this fact that the humpback whale was saved without people having to see a humpback whale. That through people in places that had never been to a beach stood up to save the humpback whale. And it is through things like what you were doing with the wolf, having, films. I know you do speaking engagements and shows with the photography through National Geographic. Through things like that, you may never get to see a wolf, but we can still stand up through using media and your experience.
Yeah.
That's what I think is so powerful.
Absolutely. We know that they're there, and we know we have to care about them. And it's, and one thing that's really important for your audience to know is that even if you live in a state, well, most states don't have wolves. Wolves belong to all of us. They are our iconic American species. They were brought back via reintroduction through the ESA with our tax dollars. They belong to all of us. So when you hear about states like Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, wanting to manage wolves and kill them off in huge numbers, we have a voice in saying no. And because even though it's not happening in your state, you still have to speak up for them.
Yeah. And wolves are being hunted. So they've been taken off the endangered species list. And in the states of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming have hunting seasons. And some of these seasons go on for 11 months or more. And, you never have a elk hunting season that goes on for more than a couple of weeks. But hunting wolves is allowed, and they're killing a lot of them. And killing wolves doesn't make it better for ranchers. That's the theory, that you have to manage these animals. The wolves manage themselves just like the African lion manages itself. When there's not enough food prey, they won't breed at all. And it's only two members of the pack normally that breed at all. So if there is enough food and maybe a surplus of food, they'll let another member of the pack breed. But but when you hunt wolves and you break up packs, and the alpha male is probably, or the female, they stand up to the perceived danger. And when that happens, they make themselves a target, and they get killed first. They're bigger usually, and hunters value them as trophies. Well, you break up that pack of 10, 12 wolves, and now you have a dysfunctional pack of youngsters that go around in groups of 2s and 3s. Well, they can't bring down the large elk that the bigger pack could bring down and defend and consume. So they go after livestock, these smaller packs, and that just makes it worse for ranchers. It's much better for ranchers to work with wolves, and we work with a lot of ranchers in Montana and Alberta and other places, and there's things that ranchers can do, like cleaning up the carcasses of dead livestock that die of natural causes on the frontier, and pick them up and put them away someplace so wolves and other predators don't build up bad habits.
Yeah, that just knowing where wolf den sites are and not running your cattle and sheep on top of a den site, having range riders. There's so many simple things that can be done. And we've found that ranchers that had issues, not only with wolves but with bears, who've implemented these really simple changes, have had no problems whatsoever. So these techniques do work if the ranchers are willing to open up their hearts and minds to them. And they're simple changes, and it's just getting rid of an old mindset and going back to the way people were ranching over 100 years ago.
I know, you're really right.
This is true.
Years ago, I'm talking 12 years ago, when we first started our radio show, we interviewed a ranching company out of Idaho, and they were working with Fish and Wildlife now, in regards to wolves. And so they were watching on sensors, and they had a chip on the sheep or whatever. They knew when the wolves were coming, and so they would move their sheep to another pasture so that the wolves wouldn't get them. they were really, I thought that was a really cool way. They're working with nature. They were part of the one side of their property was a wildlife refuge, I believe. I mean, I'm just going off of 12 years ago.
It's just being willing to be proactive, and unfortunately, and I hate to say it, but a lot of ranchers have gotten lazy. They put their cattle and sheep out on the range, and they come back 3 months later, and nobody's keeping an eye on them, and you can't do that.
Then the wolf gets the blame.
And this is mostly on public land, federal land that belongs to all of us, and then our wolves get
cattle
killed
are all
because of it.
grazing
Can I just say about
public land out
the
here?
permit to graze something on public land is far cheaper than when you go and pay for a campsite.
Yeah, it's
Just
like
saying.
Oh, absolutely.
$1.25
Yes.
or something.
Yeah. It's disgustingly low.
I mean, the cattle industry versus the wild horses has been going on for years.
Exactly.
It's the same thing. It's all
so
connected.
if you want to go camp somewhere, you're going to pay $5, $7, maybe $30 and up. But if you want to graze 100 head of cattle, $1.
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, maybe $1. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
And I think this is important why we talk to the youth, because we've got to leave this better for them, man. We've got to clean it up, and we've got to let them know what's going on
right now.
I'm really so glad that you're doing this for the youth. Jim, I want to ask you, what was your introduction to the wild world of wildlife?
I grew up in Florida, and I was able to go scuba diving at the age of 8 because my father started a sporting goods store in Delray Beach on the East Coast. And I was able to, I developed, I was just very fascinated with the undersea. And I started making movies underwater when I was 19, and I think I was 14 when I started taking pictures. And so it all developed from the undersea.
Yeah.
And then I came to Idaho, first to that ranch in Wyoming, and saw this area. And I sort of evolved out of the sea with the beaver and the beaver film that I had made. So but I've always been fascinated by wildlife.
I want to ask you too, because I think we're in this world of digital photography, and I know you've been going through all of that, of the doing all spheres of what's happening in the world of filmmaking and photography, and as what we do with our magazines and everything too, I'm always like, I don't want to get too close to the animal, don't do this, and then it's like get a bigger lens, and I'm like, well, I want to show sense of place so people understand the habitat. I don't think people get too close. And it's interesting because watching what you have done and reading your book, it has really kind of balanced me out in understanding how to film and also having a healthy respect. And so what you do is completely different, and I want to make sure people understand that. Don't try and befriend a wolf. Don't try and, So any tips for people out there now, because everyone's click happy and, photographer these days.
Oh, selfies.
So any tips for people out there on how they can really respect wildlife when they go out and into a national park or a state park and want to photograph?
I think really just don't panic to the point where you're so excited when you see something. Stay calm and just remember to respect the animal space, because I think that's the biggest thing that happens. People see an animal, they get, especially in a national park where the animals are fairly habituated, and they just kind of go a little bit crazy, and they get closer and closer and closer. And you've got to respect that animal space, because if you don't, it's going to be the animal, that particular animal, that's going to pay the price. If you get hurt, that animal will be killed.
Exactly.
Even if you're the one that's interfered with them. And just remembering that, just you don't want. I guess it would be a little bit similar to if you're photographing people. You don't want to absolutely invade somebody's space. There's an amount of respect you have to have, and you really have to have that with animals as well. They're very sensitive, and if you keep your distance, you're probably going to get better shots, maybe a little further away. But in this magical world of digital, you can kind of close in on stuff like that. But you'll get better behavior if you're further away. And I think that's really the best thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing everything. Sharing your story. The book is out now, everybody. You can go get Running with Wolves, Our Story of Life with the Sawtooth-Pack. And also go to livingwithwolves.org. Jamie, you want to give us everybody an overview with what you're doing? Because this is a whole nonprofit you guys have.
Sure. Yeah. We after we finished the filming of the wolves, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, all wanted us to go do something with another animal, and we thought about it, and we kept coming back to wolves, because we really felt that the wolves gave us so much personally that it was really our job to speak for them, because they were still so misunderstood. So we put down our camera gear and we started this nonprofit, Living with Wolves, which is based on educational outreach. Jim and I speak all over the country, all over the world, dispelling the myths about wolves, telling our story, telling their story, telling the story of wolves in Yellowstone. And we also we sponsor a lot of research in the national parks. And we have a photography exhibit that is currently at the Detroit Zoo, and then another exhibit is traveling Colorado right now. It's in Boulder, the Museum of Boulder, and we created an interactive version of our photography exhibit, which is now on our website that you can go see. And writing the books and just really getting people to understand wolves better, because we really had hoped that by the time the Sawtooth-Pack was no more, there would be a better understanding of wolves. But we still have a lot of work to do.
Right, yeah. I think it's never ending with wolves, and it's a hard thing. And Jim, I also want to say thank you for what you did for cougars too, because cougars are really they're it's like the wolves, man. We got to protect them too.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate what you did with the cougars, and also showing that cougars are not supposed to be pets. Wolves are not supposed to be pets. There's a difference.
And actually, the cougar film stopped cougar hunting in California.
Awesome.
That was a huge deal.
That film was
huge deal what you did.
I think it was Proposition 17 or something like that.
Yeah, the Humane Society of the United States used it to shut it down.
To shut down using radio-collared dogs. I think that.
Yeah, I think that was it. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's important. I mean, that's it. When you can show people and they can get connected, and your film work, obviously, I mean, it's touching, and you see it, and you're like, oh, wow, how can you not have a feeling about wolves or cougars or beavers? And, oh, my gosh, I'm so excited because I saw my first beaver in Yuma.
Exactly. We were
and it tripped me out when I saw my first beaver. I'm
like,
I've never seen a beaver.
Way.
And it was the coolest thing ever. And it was
they're very cool.
They're so cool. And they swim around, and she's like, this is me. And she was pregnant.
I've seen
the
beaver nest or house, in Yellowstone, but I never saw the beaver in Yellowstone. We go to Yuma, and they're bringing them back, and here's the beaver, and she's swimming. She crosses the path in front of us, and we're like, oh, she's pregnant.
One of the happiest days of my life. This beaver.
Oh, that's great.
So cool.
And we've seen many of them, and that is about restoration and people understanding and getting into it. So thank you both for joining us. Everyone, again, the book, Running with Wolves, Our Story of Life with the Sawtooth-Pack, and it's Jim and Jamie Dutcher. Go to livingwithwolves.org. Go to Amazon, all those places, through National-Geographic-Kids as well. Thanks for joining us. We're going to play a song for you. It's called Alpenglow. It's from our friend Everin Ozan, amazing Native American flute player. Is 9 years old, got to the Grand Canyon, took his pocket money, went into a gift shop, and there he is. He went and bought a flute and can play. So here it is. Everyone, Alpenglow.